My parents sold my inheritance to pay my sister's wedding, so I bought their house from the bank and made them pay rent every single month. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and my childhood home was the only place that ever truly felt safe. It wasn't big, just a two-bedroom house on the edge of a quiet town, but it held the kind of warmth that made you forget how cold people could be. My parents weren't cruel in the traditional sense. They just had a way of making me feel invisible. All the attention, the praise, the affection, it was always for my sister. Lily, she was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, I used to sit on the creaky front steps with my grandfather, the only person who made me feel seen. He'd tell me stories about how he built this house with his own hands, after returning from the war. Every nail, every beam carried his sweat and hope. One day this place will be yours, he'd tell me, patting my shoulder with a proud smile. And when he passed away, he made good on that promise. The house was left to me in his will, something my parents never quite forgave him for. After he died, things in the house changed. The laughter faded. My parents started arguing more about money, about bills, about Lily's dreams that always seemed to come with a price tag. I tried to help where I could, working odd jobs after high school, putting a little money aside for repairs. I had this dream of restoring the old place, new paint, new floors, keeping his spirit alive in every corner. But even as I planned it, I could feel the distance between me and my family growing wider. My mother's tone toward me hardened. My father stopped asking for my opinion, and Lily, she barely looked up from her phone. Still, that house kept me grounded. It was my inheritance, my anchor. Or so I thought, the calm before betrayal begins. If my life revolved around surviving quietly, Lily's revolved around shining. She was the kind of person people gravitated toward, confident, loud, always dressed like she was walking into a spotlight. My parents adored her for it. When she got engaged to her long-term boyfriend, Ethan, the house turned into a full-blown wedding headquarters overnight. It didn't matter that my father was months behind on mortgage payments, or that my mother was juggling overdue bills. All that mattered was that Lily's big day would be perfect. Remember walking into the kitchen one morning to find my mother, surrounded by bridal magazines, color swatches, and cake catalogs. "Mom," I said carefully, "are you sure we can afford all this?" She didn't even look up. "You wouldn't understand," she snapped. "This is her once-in-a-lifetime moment." My father just nodded, too tired or too beaten down to argue. The worst part? Lily didn't even seem grateful. She'd toss around phrases like, "It's the least you guys can do," or "I can't have a cheap wedding." I tried not to let it get to me, but the resentment festered quietly. Every time I looked at the peeling wallpaper or the leaky roof, I thought about how much that money could have done for the house, for Grandpa's house. One evening, while everyone was talking about venues and catering, I brought it up again. "You know, Grandpa wanted this place to stay in the family, right? Maybe we should focus on fixing it before spending thousands on one day." Lee laughed. "You're so dramatic. You act like the house is some sacred temple." My mother gave me that familiar glare, the one that said I was ruining the mood again. I stopped talking after that. Sometimes silence feels safer than being the only voice of reason in a room full of delusion. But deep down, a knot formed in my chest, a quiet warning that something was about to give way. The calm before discovery. A few weeks later, I stopped by the house unannounced. The wedding was only a month away. I figured I'd drop off some tools to fix the porch railing before it collapsed completely. But the moment I walked in, something felt off. The walls looked bare. The old family photos that used to hang in the hallway gone. The antique clock Grandpa had given my father missing. Even the smell of home, that faint mix of dust and lemon polish, was replaced by something sterile and unfamiliar. "Mom?" I called out, but only the echo of my voice answered. A few minutes later, my father shuffled out of the kitchen, avoiding eye contact. "What's going on?" asked. "Why is everything packed up?" He mumbled something about cleaning before guests arrive and tried to change the subject. My stomach twisted. I'd seen this pattern before, the fidgeting, the quick topic change. It was the way he acted when he was lying. Later that week, a letter arrived at my apartment. It was from the county office. I almost tossed it aside, assuming it was junk mail, until I noticed the address, my grandfather's address. My hands went cold as I read the first line. Notice of property transfer. At first I didn't believe it. There had to be a mistake. I called the county clerk, my voice shaking, and asked who the new owner was. She read the names aloud, my parents. They had sold the property 2 weeks ago. No signature from me. No notice. Nothing. It felt like the air left the room. My inheritance, my grandfather's legacy, had been turned into cash for a wedding. My parents had sold the house that was rightfully mine without even telling me that night. I sat in my car outside the now empty house, staring at the windows that once glowed with life. I wasn't angry yet, just numb. But somewhere deep inside, something was breaking apart. Piece by piece, the betrayal sinks in. Confrontation looms the next morning. I drove straight to my parents' house, shaking the entire way. I didn't even knock. I walked right in, letter in hand. My mother was at the kitchen table, sipping coffee like it was any other day. My father sat beside her, pretending to read the newspaper. "You sold it," I said flatly. Both their heads turned, but neither spoke. I slammed the letter down. "You sold Grandpa's house, my inheritance, without even telling me?" My mother's expression hardened immediately. "Watch your tone," she said coldly. "That house was ours. We lived there for 30 years. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. "It wasn't yours to sell," I shot back. "Grandpa left it to me. You forged my signature or something. Do you realize how illegal that is?" My father sighed, not meeting my eyes. "We had no choice," he muttered. "Your sister's wedding is expensive, and we were drowning in debt." I laughed, that bitter, broken kind of laugh that doesn't sound human. "So you sold the one thing he left me? The one thing that proved I mattered?" My mother slammed her cup down. "You're being selfish. Lily's getting married. We couldn't let her be embarrassed." Lily walked in halfway through, hair in curlers, smiling until she realized what was happening. "Oh God, are we still on this?" she said, rolling her eyes. "You're such a drama queen." I stared at her, stunned. "You knew?" She shrugged. "Mom told me it was fine. It's just a house." That sentence. It's just a house burned into me. It wasn't just a house. It was everything. The years I spent mowing that lawn, repainting the fence, saving to restore it, all gone. My father's voice cracked. "We'll make it up to you." "Son." But I knew they wouldn't. I looked at the three of them, the perfect family without me, and realized there was nothing left to say, so I turned and walked out. The slam of the door echoing louder than any apology they never gave. The relationship fractures beyond repair. After that day, I stopped calling them. Weeks went by, then months. My phone stayed silent, except for the occasional group photo of Lily's wedding that popped up on social media, her in a designer gown, smiling under chandeliers paid for by the house my grandfather built with his bare hands. Each image felt like a punch to the gut. I'd scroll past them fast, pretending they didn't exist. But the truth is, I'd never felt more unwanted in my life. I moved into a small apartment across town, cracked walls, buzzing lights, and a view of the alley instead of a garden. But at least it was mine. Every morning before work, I told myself to let it go, to stop caring. But letting go of something that defined your entire childhood isn't that easy. Some nights I'd lie awake replaying my grandfather's words. One day, "This place will be yours." I'd wonder if he'd made a mistake believing in me, or if my parents had just broken something that couldn't be fixed. Eventually, I buried myself in work. I took every overtime shift I could get, volunteered for extra projects, anything to distract myself. My boss noticed my drive and promoted me within a year. The paycheck grew, but the emptiness stayed. Money doesn't patch emotional bullet holes. It just helps you hide the scars. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is David from Crescent Bank," the voice said. "I'm trying to reach the previous owner of 14 Maple Avenue. Are you still connected to that property?" My heart stopped. That was Grandpa's address. "Why?" I asked cautiously. "The property's entering foreclosure," he replied. "Thought you might want to be informed since you're listed as the heir in the old records." For a second I couldn't breathe. The same house my parents sold, my inheritance, was now being repossessed by the bank. I hung up, staring at the wall. As a single thought cut through the noise, maybe fate was giving me one last chance to take back what was stolen. Justice quietly starts to stir. For a long moment, I just sat there in my apartment, phone still in my hand, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. The irony of it all hit me in waves. They had sold my inheritance to fund a wedding. Now the same house was being repossessed. Life had a cruel sense of humor. But underneath the bitterness, something else started to form. Not joy, not even revenge. Just a quiet sense of justice waiting to unfold. I drove to the bank the next morning. The clerk, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked through the file and confirmed it. "Your parents defaulted on the mortgage 6 months ago," he said. "The house is scheduled for a bank auction next month." He looked at me over his glasses. "You interested in bidding?" I nodded, my voice steady. "Yeah, you could say that." On the drive home, the plan formed naturally, like it had always been waiting in the back of my mind. I'd buy it silently. No confrontations, no warnings. They wouldn't know a thing until the papers were signed. For years, I'd begged for their approval, their recognition. But this time, I wanted something better. Power without noise. I spent the next few weeks preparing. I checked my savings, liquidated some assets, and even reached out to an old friend in real estate to help me navigate the process discreetly. Every night, I'd drive by the house. The once bright garden was overgrown. The porch was caving in. The for sale notice fluttered in the wind like a final insult to my grandfather's legacy. When the auction day came, I wore the same watch Grandpa gave me on my 16th birthday, the one thing they hadn't taken. The room was filled with strangers bidding on numbers and walls they'd never lived in. But when the gavel came down and the auctioneer said, "Sold," it was like I could finally breathe again. The house was mine again. But this time, it wasn't a gift. It was just as written in ink. The power dynamic quietly shifts in his favor. I'll never forget the feeling of holding those papers in my hands. The official deed. Stamped and signed. My name printed clearly where there's once sat. It wasn't joy I felt. It was something colder, steadier, like the calm that settles right before a storm. I drove straight to the old neighborhood, parked across the street, and stared at the house. The shutters were broken, the paint was chipped, and the garden my grandfather once tended was buried under weeds. But to me, it still looked like victory. I didn't tell anyone. Not a friend, not a coworker, and definitely not my family. I started small, cleaning out the junk left behind, replacing rotted floorboards, and painting over water stains. Every brushstroke felt like erasing their betrayal. I restored the porch swing, polished Grandpa's old brass doorknob, and left his favorite armchair in the living room exactly where it had always been. 2 weeks later, the phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. Her voice was trembling. "We might have to move out soon," she said. "The bank's taking the house. We don't know where to go." I leaned back in my chair, letting silence fill the space between us. "That's rough," I finally said. "Have you talked to whoever bought it?" She sighed, desperate. "Not yet. Maybe they'll let us rent it back for a while." I could almost hear the irony dripping through the phone. The very people who told me it was just a house were now begging to stay in it. "I'm sure it'll work out," I said evenly, hung up before the guilt could catch up to me. That night, stood outside under the porch light, looking at the front door I had just repainted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unwanted. I felt in control, and that was worth more than any apology I could ever offer. The moment before the inevitable reveal. A week later, the inevitable happened. My parents got the eviction notice from the bank, and, as expected, reached out to the new landlord. I had already set up a management company to handle everything. I wanted this to be clean, professional, and poetic. When they called to schedule a meeting, I told the agent to meet them at the property, and I made sure I was the one waiting there. When they pulled up, Their faces went pale. My father's jaw dropped. My mother froze mid-step, and Lily, who had tagged along for moral support, stood there speechless. What? What are you doing here? My mother stammered. I smiled faintly. I own this place now. The words hung in the air like thunder before lightning. My father's voice cracked. You can't be serious. I handed them the paperwork, the deed, the signatures, the dates. Completely legal, I said quietly. I bought it fair and square from the bank. My mother's face went red. You're punishing us. You did this out of spite. I shook my head. No, I did this because you sold something that wasn't yours. Now it's back where it belongs. Lily crossed her arms, trying to regain her usual confidence. You wouldn't actually kick your parents out, would you? Her tone dripped with disbelief, as if I was still the weak one she could guilt into silence. I met her eyes. No, I won't kick them out. But they'll have to pay rent like everyone else. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. My father looked like he might collapse. My mother whispered, Rent? From our own son? I folded my arms. From your landlord, I corrected. For years, I'd been the invisible one. The son who didn't matter. The heir who got ignored. But as they stood there, small and stunned on the porch they once called theirs, I realized something profound. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. The power shift has finally landed, but guilt begins to creep in. The fallout was immediate and ugly. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. My parents, once the picture-perfect couple who bragged about Lily's accomplishments, were now whisper fodder for every backyard conversation. I started receiving late-night calls from my mother, her tone swinging between pleading and furious. You're humiliating us, she cried one evening. How could you do this to your own family? I kept my voice calm. You did this to yourselves. You sold my inheritance for a party and expected no consequences. But she wouldn't listen. We raised you. We fed you, she shouted. And I'm grateful, I replied softly. But you also taught me how little my worth meant when money was involved. My father, quieter but no less stubborn, tried a different approach. He came by one morning with an envelope of cash, half the rent, and a forced smile. We'll pay what we can, he said. His voice cracked halfway through. I took the envelope and nodded. That's fine. Payments are due on the 1st of every month. He stood there for a moment, eyes filled with a mix of pride and pain, then turned and walked away. Lily wasn't any better. She texted me long paragraphs dripping with guilt-tripping venom. You've become cold, heartless, exactly what you accused Mom and Dad of being. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say to someone who'd stood by and watched it all happen. The first rent payment cleared a week later. It was surreal seeing their names appear on a digital transaction that labeled them as tenants. A twisted part of me felt satisfaction. The same satisfaction that comes when justice finally catches up to years of neglect. But when I drove past the house that evening, the lights were off. For the first time, it didn't look like home. It looked like a monument to everything broken between us, something that couldn't be fixed. Only paid for, revenge feels hollow, and guilt starts to surface. Revenge is supposed to feel good. That's what I told myself when I signed the ownership papers, when I handed over the first lease agreement, when I watched them squirm under the weight of their own choices. But as weeks passed, the satisfaction started to fade. In its place was a quiet, aching emptiness. I'd drive by the house sometimes not to check on it, but because I couldn't stay away. It was still beautiful in its way, even after everything. The porch lights glowed faintly at night and through the window. I'd sometimes see my father sitting in Grandpa's old chair, staring at nothing. One night, my mother called again. Her voice was small, fragile, nothing like the sharp, domineering tone she used to have. We're trying, she said softly. Your dad's working extra shifts. Lily barely calls anymore. I don't know what happened to us. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. You made your choices, Mom, I whispered. Now you're just living with them. After hanging up, I sat alone in my dark apartment. The silence was unbearable. I'd fought so hard to reclaim justice, But instead of victory, all I felt was isolation. I thought of Grandpa again. How he'd never have wanted this. He'd wanted family to mean something. He'd wanted peace, not punishment. And maybe that's what hurt the most, realizing that in my quest for justice, I'd become just as cold as they once were to me. Lily sent one last message that night. Mom's not doing well. She's been crying for days. Is this really what you wanted? I didn't reply. I couldn't, because part of me didn't know anymore. I looked around my spotless apartment, the one I'd built from nothing, and for the first time in years I cried, not for them, not even for Grandpa, but for the version of me that thought revenge would fix the hole they left behind, guilt. And reflection began to reshape the ending. Time softened everything in ways I didn't expect. A few months passed since the confrontation, and the sharp edges of my anger started to dull. I didn't forgive them, not yet, but the constant ache began to fade. The rent kept coming in on time, envelopes neatly sealed and dropped off every first of the month. It felt mechanical, transactional until one day. My father came to hand it to me in person. He didn't say much, just stood there at the doorway. "House looks good," he murmured, eyes scanning the freshly painted trim. I nodded. "I'm taking care of it." He hesitated, then said, "You always did." There was no argument in his tone, no defensiveness, just exhaustion. For the first time in years, I saw the man he used to be, the one who taught me how to fix a bike chain and drive a stick shift. Something in me loosened. After that, I started visiting occasionally. Never long, never sentimental, just to check the plumbing or make sure the place was holding up. My mother would make tea, still avoiding eye contact, but her voice was softer now. The hostility was gone, replaced by something like humility. Once she even said, "Your grandfather would be proud of what you've done with the place." I didn't respond, but the words lingered. Lily had stopped calling altogether. Her perfect marriage had started to crumble under financial stress, or so the neighbors said. I didn't feel joy hearing it, just a strange sense of balance returning. One evening, as I stood on the porch with my father watching the sunset spill gold over the yard, he said quietly, "We were wrong. No excuses, no justifications. Just that." I didn't say "I forgive you," but I nodded. And maybe, in that moment, it was enough. The revenge that once consumed me no longer mattered. What I found instead was something heavier but purer. Closure, peace is near. But the true emotional resolution awaits. A year later, I stood on the porch of that house again, not as the angry son or the betrayed heir, but as someone finally at peace. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs, just like when Grandpa used to sit here with me, telling stories about hard work and dignity. I ran my hand along the railing I'd rebuilt, feeling the rough grain of the wood under my fingers, proof that some things can be broken and still made whole again. Inside, the house was quiet. My parents had settled into their new rhythm. They paid rent on time, tended to the garden, even repainted the shutters themselves. It wasn't the same as before, but it was stable. I'd stopped seeing them as villains and started seeing them as flawed people who finally faced the weight of their choices. Sometimes, that's more powerful than any revenge. I sat in Grandpa's old chair, the one they'd nearly thrown away years ago, and looked around. The sunlight poured in through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted by betrayal. It felt like it belonged to me in every sense, not because of a will or paperwork, but because I had earned the peace it now held. As I got up to leave, my mother called from the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready." Her voice was calm, genuine. My father gave a small nod from his seat at the table. And I realized something simple but profound. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own version of family now, built not from their love, but from my resilience. Before stepping out, I whispered softly into the quiet, "I took care of it, Grandpa, just like you wanted." And for the first time in years, I felt like he was there, not watching from above, but resting peacefully in the walls of the house he built. The house I reclaimed, closure, balance, and poetic justice intertwined to end the story.